Hi, I'm Clyde Kusatsu. I play Vice Admiral Nakamura on Star Trek Next Generation, and you are listening to Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. And welcome back to the second part of my interview with Clyde Kusatsu. What started out as an innocent chat like I usually do with my guests turned into this epic career-spanning interview, and that's why I decided to break it up into two more manageable pieces. Last time, we focused a lot on his work in the 70s, but this week we pushed forward into the 80s and the 90s, and a little of Clyde's modern work too. If you listened to our previous episode with Clyde, you already heard me rattle off just a few of the 300 plus shows and films that he's worked on. So I'm not going to do that again, but I will say this week we are discussing finally his time on Star Trek The Next Generation as Admiral Nakamura, his role in Family Matters, starring in the breakthrough sitcom All-American Girl and how that ties into his personal battle with alcoholism, being directed by Jonathan Frakes and Patrick Stewart, and one of the first stories we're going to get to this week, working with William Shatner across 3 different decades, which of course, if it's coming from Clyde, branches off into several other stories about the entertainment industry. I want to add also, this week the show gets a bit heavier because we discussed his experiences as an Asian American performer in Hollywood. This also leads to his take on quote-unquote wokeness. Now, I like to get serious on Trek Untold, and this show never really shies away from getting political. But I also like to do my best to let you know what's going to happen and what to expect, and also how heavy things can get. Admittedly, I think I came into this discussion not as well as equipped as I have in the past to express myself the way I wanted. And I also didn't just want to spend the entire episode discussing this topic, so I want to preface it that some of my audience members may agree with his thoughts on the topic, while others might not. Listening to his stories and experiences, I can gather why his take is different from other people we've had on the show, so I'm hoping that no matter what your stance is on the topic, you can be open to understanding the reasons for his beliefs, which he very clearly explains. And while those may differ from mine or from yours, at least we're looking at it through a different lens, and it's never a bad thing to engage in meaningful conversations with others who share experiences that are not the same as ourselves. That's my completely non-legally binding way to say that I don't necessarily agree with some of his thoughts on the topic, but these are his experiences, and they certainly shaped how his life and career has been. So take it however you'd like, but at the very least, we're seeing things through a different perspective, and I think that's very important, at least, to consider. And it also gave me some new tools to discuss this in the future too, which I think will be very useful for other episodes. Either way, it shouldn't take away from you enjoying his life and times, and we're going to go pretty in-depth on all sorts of things today, so no matter what, I still hope you enjoy everything we say this week. Anyway, that's enough of my rambling and disclaimers. Let's go ahead and get back to being excited, because I'm so happy to share with you now part 2 of my incredibly epic chat with Clyde Kusatsu. But before we begin this week's episode, if you'd like to support this show, please don't forget to follow Trek Untold on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to get the latest updates and all sorts of other fun Star Trek-related content. You can also check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/trekuntold, where you can support this show for as little as $2 a month. At higher tiers, you can check out the shows before they come out, know about my guests in advance, and even have a chance to ask them questions, among other benefits coming soon. Shout out to our sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions, who create 3D printed toys and prop replicas inspired by Star Trek. Their items come in all shapes and all sizes and are always amazing, but you're going to hear a little bit more about them later on in the show. If you're listening to us on iTunes or any other audio platform that allows for ratings and reviews, please leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to us at youtube.com/nerdnewstoday and give the video a thumbs up and a comment. Doing any of those things help keep this show growing and allow me to continue bringing you awesome guests and great conversations every single week. Now, without further ado, let's beam in this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. Well, Clyde, you've gotten to work with so many legends throughout your career. I mean, we just mentioned all the marbles earlier. You mentioned Sean Penn, all the marbles. We didn't even mention Peter Falk, but so many legends that you've worked with throughout your career, even at this point, which is we're still in like the 70s here. But I want to move ahead a little bit to like the 80s, and we're talking 1985 here, and that was your first time working with William Shatner. And I mention this because this is your first time with Shatner in 85 on T.J. Hooker, but you'd work with him again 2 more times in your career for a total of 3. If you can do math, that's 3. You worked with him again on Boston Legal and later on in Shit My Mother Says. So, I mean, you're around this guy 3 different shows. You've got to have some interesting relationship with Shatner. So I'm curious to hear, what is it like working with Shatner basically 3 different decades?
Um, actually, the interesting thing about those experiences were, I think we were able to have a little bit more conversation when we were doing Shut My Father Said than before. During TJ Hooker, he was more caught up in being TJ and making sure that his hair was okay. Because not to be a teller of tales, each decade you're going, how the hell does he manage? He really maintains it,
I don't know how he does it today still, at 90.
Yes, he's got a good person who makes his pieces. That's all I can say.
Good visual effects team.
Yeah, it's got to give Bill credit though for being able to navigate through the decades. I mean, what is that, Priceline.com? Everybody said, why is he doing that? Well, he did it because he got a great equity back end on the goddamn thing. And he didn't have to work again in his life. So it's one of those things where it's like, I mean, he's had tragedy in his life and everything, but he just keeps bouncing back. And the fact that he winds up being one of the first guys to hit outer space who's not a trained astronaut says something as well, But I would be bereft to imply if there was anything more aside from working with Bill and being in the same projects with him. So it's like, sometimes it's like, I feel like Zelig sometimes, the 6 degrees of, you're next to somebody there. But and a lot of times the tales you can tell are the tales other people tell of the person that you're working with. And that wouldn't be fair because it's hard to vet whether those tales were true or just stretched out type of thing, But I mean, certain people you're going, oh yeah. I mean, when we did the challenge, John Frankenheimer, our technical advisor at the time was a thin Steven Seagal.
Well, what is that like? I've never seen a thin Steven Seagal.
Oh, Steven was this, some of the stories he told then, he still tells now. He has an ego. Yes, he does. And at the time, he was this gaijin, the first gaijin or white person to have his own dojo in Osaka in, what is it? In his Aikido, correct. But what he doesn't, and he's good in the thing, but he'd say, oh, Clyde, I don't understand them. I'm giving them all the beautiful exact things for the Aikido, but they don't want to shoot it. They want to go to this other, because it wasn't filmically happening. That's why, because, it's nice to see the form, but you have to engage the audience. So they went with Mifune's person from Mifune Productions. So at any rate, what Steven failed to say at the time was the fact that he had the dojo because he married the daughter of the owner of the dojo. And he had 2 kids with her. And then, of course, he left her and went to Hollywood, met a guy named, the head of CAA, and who sold him on the studio executives, sold him on his talent, and he wound up being an action star, right? And then he was really, but it was always like, oh man, I just don't get it sometimes. And what you get is he sold it on his physical talent, but as a person, he is really, I wouldn't say, he can't be the most unpleasant chaperone, you know what I mean? Very unpleasant.
I mean, personally, one of my favorite stories about Steven Seagal is the one with Gene LaBelle. Maybe, I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Oh, Gene, yeah, Gene is a terrific guy to work with.
Yeah. If people don't know the story about Gene LaBelle and Steven Seagal, Google that. That's for another day. Did you ever cross paths with Gene?
Yeah, we would cross paths in many productions together, or he'd be doing the fight scenes like in Bring It Back Alive, or other a series that I had, action adventure series with Bruce Boxleitner.
Yep, we actually interviewed. You might know him too, Harvey Jason. We interviewed him back in the show.
Harvey, yes, Harvey, yeah, Harvey
Mystery Beer Books.
Harvey was one of our semi-regulars on Bring Him Back Alive.
Yep.
Yeah, he's Harvey's a very, very talented actor.
Yes, very talented. Yeah, and now he runs a bookstore, an amazing bookstore in Hollywood.
Yes, but he's quite the expert on rare, authenticating books and everything like that. And he hasn't acted for, I think, one of the dinosaur pictures was one of the last one he got eaten.
Yeah, he did the Lost World. That was his last film.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
And Yeah. Oh, no. All these names pop up. I mean, it's sort of like a paths cross,
Yeah, it's really cool. Everybody knows Gene LaBelle. Everybody has a Gene LaBelle story, and I guess everybody knows Harvey Jason too, because he's now supplying really amazing books to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
All right, so Clyde, let's go ahead and beam into our Star Trek discussion. And you were first seen in Star Trek: The Next Generation. You are Admiral Nakamura. You make your
correct.
debut in The Measure of a Man, which is a classic Brent Spiner data-centric episode. So let's just start at the beginning here. Had you ever auditioned for any Star Trek roles before this?
Yes, it did. In fact, I was was it Deep Space Nine? Yeah, I was
Oh,
up.
that would have been after this, actually. That would have been after. I'm going to ask you about that one. DS9 came a few years after TNG.
It did. No,
Yep.
it did.
Yep. Trust
Well,
me on that one. I know that one.
really, because that's weird. Because I seem to my memory bank was that I had auditioned for Quark because my agent said, "How would you like? What? How would you consider doing a 7-year contract in heavy makeup with it wearing a different head?" I said, "Whatever it takes. 7 years is 7 years." And so I read before Rick Berman and everything, and I didn't make the cut. And I auditioned for Rick other times, and to the point where he'd go, "Hey, hi, Clyde, how are you?" It's like, "Hi, Rick, how are you?" And it just so happened as Admiral Nakamura, it was the thing that connected. And what was great about it was I got to work with Michael Westmore again, famous family, the Westmore family. His brother Frank was our makeup guy on Bring 'Em Back Alive back in '82, because the Westmores were Universal, Paramount, Warner Brothers,
They're the first
and
family of makeup.
family makeup. The Dons were MGM, and Bob Dawn was my makeup guy that I worked with on The Challenge with Frankenheimer. But so anyway, Matt, the great thing about, I will diverge, but the great thing about Star Trek, the whole thing, it gave Michael Westmore the ability to save the art of makeup and training future makeup artists, because it provided him the lab and people who wanted to learn. Because Michael said, the hardest thing I find where you're going to spend a couple hours just in you and makeup is because you got to be Picard's equal from the Space Academy days, and it's really hard with the smooth face to age it up a little bit. So we'll add a mustache, we'll gray you up like crazy and everything like that, and try to put some stuff more age marks or whatever, so that you can come up to it. And I loved wearing the uniform that we had to fit it about 2 or 3 times because it was this look and everything. And then to be on the set to go, Bridge, or touch command, going on transporter or whatever. All those things were like flash back to 1966, watching the first Star Trek series that I saw as a 18-year-old at the time. And it's sort of like, you're living the dream, you're living the dream. You're all get up. And then to work with Brent again was fun. And at that time, Brent was sort of like, a little bit of grumbling about having to be painted up all the time. Until I said, Brent, you could have been doing 7 years of Sprayberry in Paradise with Jim Neighbors. This will change your whole world. And later on, he would go, yes, don't talk about it anymore. I get it. I really get it. He didn't drink the Kool-Aid, but he understood why the Kool-Aid tastes the way the Kool-Aid tastes, and why you keep ordering the Kool-Aid.
And if I may compliment you too, Clyde, I got to say you look younger today than you did in that Star Trek episode. That old age makeup they put on you, that made you look quite old. You look so good. So
It worked. Yeah,
it did the job.
Michael stuff worked. That's great. That's great. Yeah. So anyway, I did, and then when the set was so welcoming, it was like, you're treated as a peer and respectfully, and also it's like, geez, thank you for doing the show. And it's like, oh wow, thank you. So I've been to the Star Trek Creation Convention twice, and it's like kind of like a homecoming, and it's like it was like kind of cool to see all the old faces again. Like LeVar Burton and I did voiceover on Captain Planet and the Planeteers, going way back into the 70s, you know.
Oh, that was the 90s, actually. I grew up
Is
watching
it
that show.
90s?
That was Captain Planet
Oh,
was the 90s, yep.
oh, okay. Yeah, Whoopi Goldberg was, Mother Earth, I think, Gaia or
Gaia,
something.
yep.
Yeah, so it was like, we shot it and we recorded little studio in Studio City, kind of a thing. You just never know who the heck you're working with, but the constant would be a guy named Frank Welker, who is this voiceover artist supreme.
Oh yeah,
Especially
I
when he
wish
does animals and
he's one of those guys that makes me wish this show wasn't just Star Trek and I could just do everything, because Frank is one of those, like, he is a true legend in the industry.
Oh,
And my God, yeah, I'd love to talk to him.
absolutely. It was the days where all of a sudden he was going through his mail and his residuals were this thick. The pile was this thick. Going, Jesus, no wonder you're gonna buy a plane and everything like that. But yeah, so anyway, I wound up doing. Well, the thing that's cool about it is I didn't realize at the time, but I also was able to guest as Nakamura on the season finale of the whole thing, and just to be part of that, the history is always cool. That's all.
I don't know if you're aware, but the part that you played, I had read that initially, both times actually that you were on the show, I guess, it was meant for different actors. Originally, like, I think one of the parts was meant for a character named like Admiral Blackwell, and they couldn't get this person on. And I think same thing with your second appearance. It was meant for someone else. They couldn't get them. So I was wondering if you had heard anything about that, if there's any truth to that, or if this is your first time hearing that.
This is my first time hearing that.
Okay, I mean, this is just what I've heard secondhand, rumor and innuendo, but I was just curious if you had any thoughts on it. So, interesting. Yeah.
Oh no, hey, I mean, hey, I'll take it because it has like 3 appearances as the Admiral, so it's sort of like you're part of the the Star Trek Next Generation universe, and
that's a story a lot of folks have had too.
Baseball cards, huh?
That's a story I've heard from a lot of folks too. Is I've interviewed folks who were, basically one actor couldn't do the job, they came in and did it, and now it's like their iconic role. So it's hats off to you.
Yeah. You never know what's going to happen. Like Gary Cole was originally going to be Mel Prophet in Wise Guy, that Kevin Spacey wound up getting cast in.
Yeah.
Because Gary was indisposed. So, and then from that launched Kevin Spacey's career before he crashed and burned.
Yeah, I'm not touching that one, Clyde. I'm not going there.
No, we're not going to touch that one. No.
But as far as like your shoot day, I mean, do you remember much about it on the episode of Measure of a Man, let's say? Do you remember much about that shoot day? Because I know there's not really a ton of meat to pick apart here in this one, but you basically do get to walk across the set with Patrick Stewart. What do you remember your day being like?
Well, it's also the other, is it Annie McBride or another gal who played one of the officers or prosecutors? She's a singer. So, but I will tell you this, one thing I do remember about what I still hold dearly is how welcoming Patrick is or was at the time. And he was very, he's only maybe the second actor I know that would take his scripts and have them bound with leather. So he must have this huge collection of scripts. And Patrick was very generous and so hospitable and welcoming. And going, thank you. I think it was the second episode where he directed it, I believe. He did it. And so he was like, thank you for doing this. It's sort of, he kind of made it like, oh, thanks for doing a favor, doing this thing. I appreciate that. So, I got to meet up with Patrick at the first Star Trek convention I did back in 2014, I believe. And it was like very cool. I mean, it's like you're part of various universes, and to a different fandom. I don't know. It's more today than before. There is a growing and developing fan base for a lot of shows that you thought were gone, but are being brought up and remembered fondly. I mean, even the thing like Family Matters. It was like 11 years, and I was Principal Shimada for I don't know how many of the episodes I did. But
3 episodes, by the way, I know, because I just prepared for it. Yeah, so like you mentioned, the episode Phantasms was directed by Patrick Stewart, and I'm kind of curious to hear, what is he like as a director? And again, I want to preface, like, your scene is basically, I believe, it's like what we're doing right now. It's basically like, Space Zoom, yeah. Starfleet. But was he there actually directing you for that scene?
Oh yes.
What kind of a director is he? How would you describe what he does on set?
He's a director. I mean, a good director doesn't have to play being a director. It's just a sense of the knowledge you bring that he has to. His attention can't just be with you. His attention is with all the departments and making sure that he has it all done and his work is done. The angles, the coverage, everything like that. So there's really no time, especially when you're working with actor, director, or director, for idle chit chat. There's no way to find it. It doesn't happen very often. So all I can say is what I just said to you in regards to that. Even the last episode I did, the finale, it was one of those screen kind of a presentation stuff. So a lot of it is, you do your work, you maintain your skill set, and you be professional, and just do the good work as possible. That's all, and they capture that. And because it is captured, and it will live as long as they're good preservatives and digital whatever to keep it all together, that all the pixels stay together.
Do you recall if there was anything that was left on the cutting room floor from your time on Star Trek?
No, I don't think so. No, I think they utilized everything that needed to be done. It's like it's not the kind of thing where you go through your pages. Where am I? Where am I? Where am I? It's just like, oh, okay. It's like to me. It's just acceptance is the key, and to be part of the whole is better than trying to take over and be something more than was intended. That's not happening. There's not going to be a breakout. No, because we all know who the story is, and you just you as a supporter guest, you're servicing the story, and you're servicing the other regulars, playing off of them.
Now, were you a fan of the new Star Trek at the time? Were you watching that at all, or were you kind of just too busy working not to have time for it?
Because if my friend is Michelle Hurd, and I saw the first maybe 3 or 4 episodes, but like anything, I haven't had the time to completely watch it. It's sort of like I didn't have the time to watch the second season of Mandalorian until I was on quarantine in Australia. Also was able to watch second and third seasons of Narcos Mexico while there too, just because there's a lot of good content out there that it's like Discovery. I think I've done the first season, but I don't think I've read for a couple of parts after that, but I'm going to have to go back and see where I have to start over again at that. It's not as grabbing as Picard is. Picard is sort of like, because you got some of the icons coming back together, and how's it going to fit in? And the story is still closer to the time frame that the story ended. So there's that.
Basically real time.
And Discovery is like, now it's like, which universe are we in, or which time period is it? Georgie is now the Empress, and after a while, it's sort of like trying to keep it together. It's sort of like, it takes a lot of work. I mean, you really have to have a thesaurus next to you to keep it. The pamphlet is like, who's who now? I mean, I still am thinking, how does Stamets work now again? How do these mushroom things? How do you? Is that what warp drive? You know what I mean? It's sort of like, how does it work? That type of thing.
Mycelial network. Well, that's a whole diatribe for another day, I think. But since you did actually mention Michelle Yeoh, I mean, have you ever worked with her?
Michelle, no, I did meet Michelle a couple of years ago, and it was one of those kind of nice moments where each person recognizes the other person for their work, and it's more friendly than professional. So it was nice. It's a nice moment. That's all.
Trek Untold will return momentarily.
Trek Untold is brought to you by Triple Fiction Productions. Triple Fiction Productions produces affordable and unique 3D printed Trek-inspired products from the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the movies. Ranging from prop replicas to use in a fan film or cosplay, to accessories or playsets for figures in all different sizes, Triple Fiction Productions has got you covered. Past pieces for toys have included large centerpieces like 10 Forward from the Enterprise D, shuttlecrafts complete with working lights, and the Voyager Bridge, with smaller pieces including Borg alcoves, the Genesis device, and the dreaded arch-enemy of Worf, barrels. All highly detailed products are 3D printed and hand-painted in the USA, with new items added all the time, while simultaneously improving their printing quality based on fan feedback. To learn more about their products, visit triple-fictionproductions.net or visit them on Facebook at facebook.com/triplefictionproductions. Want to get 10% off your next purchase? Use code UNTOLD10 at checkout to receive this discount. Not applicable during sales or clearance events. That's code UNTOLD10 to get 10% off action figure dioramas, accessories, and prop replicas. Triple Fiction Productions, taking Star Trek where no 3D printer has gone before.
Hey, I'm Licia Nav, aka Ensign Sonia Gomez from Star Trek TNG, and now Captain Sonia Gomez on lower decks with her own ship, the Archimedes. Yay! I finally got a promotion after 25 years. So anyway, I'm here to talk about drivebydogooders.org. It's a little charity I run where we go to the outskirts of Skid Row, and from our car windows, we hand out basic human essentials like water, wipes, Coldstream cheese, socks, tarps, masks, t-shirts, things to keep people warm. So we just think that everyone deserves clean water, some protein, and a way to clean themselves, especially during Corona. We also hand out masks to those who really, really need it, who live in tents on the street, mainly the disabled and elderly who have a really hard time getting to services. And we do all of this with no agenda, just pure giving, no overhead. If you'd like to go to the website and donate, it's 100% tax deductible. And if you click on the donate button, you can go right to the $35 option and pick a signed autograph picture of either the Star Trek The Next Generation or Lower Decks, or Total Recall, where I played the three-breasted mutant hooker on Mars, and that's the X-rated version. Put in the comments section your address and anything you'd like me to write, and I'll personally inscribe it and mail it off to you immediately. And again, that's drivebydogooders.org. Captain Sonia Gomez, signing off.
We now return to Trek Untold.
So I want to go back in time now because, we're talking about Star Trek here, but I can remember your face very vividly as a child. And one of the roles I actually remember you the most from, I think, and we'll get into why, I guess, a little bit later on, but one of the roles I really remembered you from was as Principal Shimada from Family Matters. And I just got to rewatch those episodes as part of my research for this, and I gotta tell you, the last episode you did, in fact, that's actually one I can almost remember line for line, the one that has Tom Poston in it. That's such a fun episode, yeah, but I would love to hear any stories you have from being on that set and also working so closely with Jaleel White, especially because you started out in season 2, I think your last one was on season 5, so you basically kind of got to watch the rise of Urkel as a celebrity in a lot of ways.
Well, it's interesting because it's like what stands out is that I got to work at the show again with Reggie Van Johnson. And Reggie and I first worked together on Turner and Hooch way back in that day.
When hasn't he played a cop, really?
Oh, yeah. And especially what, to me, that old line, classic TV Christmas film, Die Hard, babe, Die Hard.
No debate for me. That is a Christmas movie.
It's a Christmas movie. And it was one of the last ones actually that Jimmy Shigeta did, and it was good that in a way, as a testament to his filmography, that Jimmy has that classic hit on his resume before he eventually passed away a few years ago. And I worked with Jimmy before in voiceovers, and even Midway. Jimmy was in Midway as well, playing one of the admirals. But at any rate, so Reggie. It was an interesting show because, was it the second season I did with Jaleel? Is that it? Because what?
You did second season, I think it was then the third, and then the fifth.
Okay, here's why that in a way stands out much more is that when we did the second season, we were shooting at the old MGM lot or Sony lot, and is it Branson, the littlest actor at the time? What was surreal about it was Bush had ordered Baghdad hit that night and attacked. So we're trying to shoot a show, and everybody's going into the little kids' dressing room because the TV's on, to the show of all the weaponry being exploded in the attack on Baghdad. So it was like, you try to make people laugh, and then there's war happening. It kind of really is kind of surreal. And that one, and working with Jaleel, it was workmanlike, all right? Because by that time, he's already established as the breakout character. But I did get some insight about how it happened, how Jaleel guested on it. And between performances and pickups, they signed him as the regular for the show. And how, in many respects, a lot of times when you're doing a show, there's a conviviality and goodwill, But when you go in for the table read, and there's that, and then you break for the writers to go over the notes from the table read. For that show, everyone went split. Reggie had his two 6-packs of Coke to take into his room. And we're there going, okay, hanging out. And it's a weird dynamics. And I do believe the show eventually went for 11 years, didn't it? I think
11 or 12. Yeah, very long.
Yeah, very long. So, and I did wind up working with a couple of the characters later on in a independent movie called Gas. But aside from that, it was kind of a weird dynamics, because sometimes I thought the comedy was a little bit too low and too stereotypic. I mean, my character, of course, with Jaleel and I had to do the Japanese. That was in a way, but that was what the hook was for the comedy. But in many respects, to me, that stands out as how there were different shows for different audiences, demographics out there, because there were more people. You'd be recognized a lot of times from a demo, like, say, in the Black community. Oh, you're the guy in Family Matters, versus if you were in a different demographic. Oh, you're the guy that was in All in the Family. It's really became this who's watching who, and that's when they had. Around that time, they had two. There was a WB network and the UPN network, and then UPN eventually became more Black oriented with their shows, Black shows, and then it was merged together. Now it's the CW. So there's a lot in that. I just realized I'm talking about entities that no longer exist, but it shows how old I've been in this business to be able to recognize that there were other mini networks going on.
But that is kind of an interesting point, though, to bring up is, we've been kind of discussing your entire career, really from the beginning to now. We're in like the mid to late 90s. And, through your eyes, you are an Asian American actor. It's a very different world that you're living in. And the kind of roles that you're getting are probably very different from what, let's say, a white actor will be getting. So, at this point in your career, how would you say things have changed in Hollywood? Were they actually better? And was better kind of like a relative term?
I believe that what helps from my point of view and from my career was that I think I hit the right moment, because a lot of times I would be, this is in the late 70s, 80s, into the 90s, would be seen where there'd be one white actor, one Black actor, one Hispanic actor, one Asian actor. And I would get it. I mean, in fact, I did a Cagney and Lacey where they didn't bother to change Detective Rodriguez, the name. But, hey, it works. I could be, part Asian or whatever. When I worked with Walker, Texas Ranger, Chuck knew of my work. And so when I did the first Walker, Texas Ranger, was like, hey, how are you? And then I wound up doing a second Walker, Texas Ranger. And then Chuck's brother, I think the last one I did, we were in Dallas, and they were saying, this is when the time I got All American Girl. And they said, Chuck and I are going to do a film this summer in San Diego. And that was the one with the dog. And we'd like you to play the head of the sheriff's department or whatever. And they never bothered to change the name to from Callahan, Captain Callahan. And somebody on the set, we're in San Diego, and someone said, Callahan? And his brother went, oh, you mean Callahan? But then now you can say, there's a lot of Asians who were adopted by Caucasian people and they have Caucasian names. There's a lot of that, But today, I believe there's much more opportunities and there's much more sensitivities going on. And you can tell it by, if you look at the landscape in commercials, for example, it's much more diverse than ever. You have different pairings. You could be Black father, Caucasian mother, multiracial daughter, and Cheerios. Or it could be a Caucasian woman with an Asian husband and Hapa kids. Or, there's just this whole mixture. And what's good about it is that people wind up getting used to, this is like normal. This is not exotic. You're not exotic. Back in the 70s, we'd be kind of exotic because nobody would see it. But now people are seeing, like if even back in the 60s or 70s, you walked in any major city, go to the hospital, there were a lot of Asians going around, but you never saw it on the TV shows. TV shows were like all white, And so it's a sort of like subliminal messaging going on. And they're finding, the ad world is finding that it enhances the buying power for their product because more people are buying the product and everything like that. And it's not segregated anymore. There's just across the board. The Hispanic market, 33% of the Hispanic market is responsible for a good amount of consumer spending. And that's where the advertisers are looking for their bucks to be spent and product to be bought, and it's a balancing out thing. And like what's interesting, what's becoming very popular on Netflix are product or content from another country, like Korean stories, Italian stories, Spanish stories, and they're realizing it just brings up the subscription level and everything like that. And even it's kind of enhanced acting for dubbing. Before, dubbers used to just be bland. It would be, and people in the United States, for example, didn't flock to see any shows that were dubbed or with subtitles, or they did because the subtitles you could understand. But now they're casting actors in the dubbed roles, which are bringing a quality of performance up in many respects, so people are understanding and have more connect. So there's a whole different. I've done a couple of dubbing for Netflix projects, and it's good because you're not doing like an animation voiceover, but you're doing like in a natural setting, So it's all work. I mean, the Brit actors say, doesn't matter, it could be radio, television, film, stage. We're actors. We're paid to act, and so we act. So it's like you're talking about a field of endeavor, a craft, so to speak. I still consider myself a journeyman actor at this point, at this time, and will continue to be a journeyman actor.
I humbly disagree with you, Clyde. You are far from that. You are a living legend, and really, it has been an honor to talk to you about all this stuff. But I kind of want to bring it back for a second to one of your earlier points. And I know you're not really watching current Star Trek or Star Trek Discovery, but one of the current criticisms from a lot of folks who don't like the new Star Trek shows is how, this season 4, the bridge crew, there's actually like no white cis heterosexual men on the bridge. It's actually predominantly women, and it's people of color on the set. You could argue that Doug Jones is the only white guy on set, but Doug Jones is wearing alien makeup, so not really.
Correct. Yeah.
A lot of folks will say that they'll use the term "go woke, go broke." And I'm curious to hear what your reaction is about that, because here we are, like I said, even Star Trek, there's no white men on that show in the bridge crew, and there's all this hatred towards the show. They don't like the inclusivity, they don't like this diversity. What's your take on it here in 2021, and just having the career that you've had, getting up to this point today? I mean, what is your take on just this idea of inclusivity and making it fit into the shows?
Well, geez, that's kind of disappointing that there's that kind of harsh reaction from the public.
Should say, just to be totally clear, it's basically kind of a line right down the middle of Star Trek fans, where one side is like, yay, this is great, and there's another part of it that's just unhappy with it. So let's just be clear about this. It's not all Trek fans. It's just basically kind of a line down the middle that separates the fandom, and it's a pretty deep line.
Yeah, no. I mean, well, that's why I say it's unfortunate, because the whole thing, I mean, it's almost like the basic premise of A Measure of a Man, correct? I mean, it's like, who's human? what is the identifying factor, what makes a person a person. So now nobody's getting pissed off that Brett Spiner is white, bathed in gold, playing an android, for example. But it should, unfortunately, it should go beyond that. It really should. And I mean, in some respects, I guess woke is that new term, huh? I think it's becoming to the point where you really have to be careful of saying anything that smacks of more so genderism, and things like a simple thing like, boy, that person is easy on the eyes. See, I said that person is easy on the eyes because I saw a thing where a woman said about a man, boy, he's easy on the eyes. But I remember recently saying that in reference to a gal, and my friend said, oh, you can't say that anymore. So, I mean, it gets to the point where pronouns, you may throw rotten tomatoes at me, but with pronouns, I go, I don't use them. I don't use pronouns. Is it gender? It's like, man, that's it. I mean, I do not care to be forced to identify in the ways that are so popular. I mean, it's taken so hard to say about mixed race when you can say hapa, which is a Hawaiian term, half haole, white, half Hawaiian or half Asian. And now people used to say, what's hapa mean? But it's easy because it's hapa is Hawaiian for half, or whatever, or double hapa or whatever. And I think there's going to be a point where sensibility will reign again. People will get away. It's also a weapon of a political faction who wants to keep everything divided and wants to supplant certain stories to utilize for their own purposes in many respects. And in many respects, it's all good fashion, down home fascism involved. Create what Orwell said is the enemy and the others, to do it. And so what it takes is just to push back and just say, I disagree. We can always say we disagree. And you can always choose either to engage in the argument or just to say, we agree to disagree and let's move on. If you want to keep it that way, then you have your own fan base or whatever. And if it's going to generate whatever, at a certain point, going, really, are we really discussing what the makeup of the bridge on the Discovery should be? What's happening in Ethiopia? What's happening in China? What's happening with the Uyghurs, where there's genocide, Myanmar, and all that kind of stuff? Do we have to do a show on that before people get engaged? The Rohingya, they're in a way they need some representation, but people will go, what are you talking about? Because in many respects, I think what's changed is the education level of our audience has gone down, because people are not paying attention in class for what's important. And that's why the classic, if you want to get ahead, study, learn, know your history so that you can understand where you're going, know your cultures so you can understand to portray the cultures and give a better help, maybe bring some understanding from one culture to the other. A lot of times you can play, I've experienced where people say, oh, I hate the stereotype enemy roles where we have to be the bad Japanese or the bad enemy. Well, first of all, if you approach it in a more authentic manner of why a person has to behave that way, for example, the lieutenant can hit the sergeant, who can hit the corporal, who can hit the private, who is a physical bashing, bullying kind of background, military service. Of course, it's understandable. There can be a moment where that person has forced to do that, but the moment can really happen. The audience can see there's something different, that the person doesn't believe it as much anymore. It's how you portray it.
I'd like to kind of follow that up with a point that I hear a lot, and that's, I usually hear this from the people who are very much against inclusion of other genders, other races, and who are against using pronouns properly, that kind of thing. I'll hear this, and a great example is I'm in a Facebook group that is for Turner Classic Movies. and it's mostly people who are much older than me. And these are folks who say how much they love Charlie Chan and how great it is to see Charlie Chan in all those movies. And then they'll complain when they don't show him on TV. And that's because there's no Asian people really in those films. They're just pretending to play Asian people.
Right.
And it's like, basically, I'll hear this again also about a lot of criticism for Star Trek Discovery, how the best person should play the part. But what if the best person is not the person who has the right experiences to play that part? But if it's, if it's a role that's meant for a certain type of person, is it the right way to go?
Well, but people don't understand. People have to have the sensitivity to understand that creates a false impression for an Asian with Charlie Chan, for example.
Yeah, Charlie Chan might not be the best example here, I guess I'm going for, but I'm hoping you kind of see the big picture.
You can also look at Mr. Moto that was played by Peter Lorre.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Peter, but the thing is, the difference between Moto and Charlie Chan was Moto also was a master of disguise. So you'd see him playing like a bazaar in, say, Morocco, like a Bedouin or something like that. Or but he'd take off the makeup and he'd show that he had ability. Then he'd, of course, go into his little subservient kind, Moto speaking, that type of thing. But Moto also was adept in jujitsu and judo. So he could defend himself and he could be offensive. He wasn't meek and just a victim, for example. And as the international police, he had a different demeanor, as opposed to Charlie Chan, who just had these witticisms and, as they quote, fortune cookie philosophies. And his sons were the ones that were, gee, Pop, I don't understand how to do that. Oh, silly boy, that kind of a thing. But it created the white version of what an Asian was. So that's where it's problematic. For example, if you do a Native American or indigenous role today, their names are like Rick Braithwaite or whatever, but they have Native American blood in them, Caucasian names, and certain tribes, you could be a member of that reservation in the tribe, but you may have a 1/16 Native American blood in you. It's if the tribe would recognize you. So, I mean, there's that way of looking at the casting situation there too. But there's also, I remember seeing a panel. We had a panel at SAG-AFTRA where it was a Native American indigenous thing, where even the Native American indigenous actor were quite respectful in doing their research. They want to make sure if they're not Lakota Sioux, they're more Comanche, that they're being respectful in being able to portray the Lakota Sioux and what's going there. And they still feel little, but if you look at it, there's more of a difference, respect for, or awareness now for the Native American and the indigenous tribes of the United States in when they portray stuff. There's a little bit more wanting to get much more of authenticness about it. There was a time when it's one of these debatable things where I remember working with Bruce Beresford, and we were between shots, and he's going, Clyde, I've got a project in the planning stage that takes place with Vietnamese. I'd like to use you, but I know you're not Vietnamese. And I would go, well, I played almost every kind of Asian cultural person, but I found a nice way of putting it, a much more understandable way of putting it is like, okay, Bruce, so if this was going to be a project that takes place in Haiti, you're going to only look at Haitian Blacks, or you're going to look at Blacks because Blacks can play Haitians. Or if you're doing something with El Salvador, you're not just going to look for El Salvadorians, but people who are Hispanic. But there's difference. The Hispanic actor is different from the Castilian Spanish, from the South American actor to the general acceptable way of talking is Mexican Spanish, what they use in Mexico. But then is there more Indo-Hispanic because there's a lot more mestizo blood in them, or is it going to be Spanish with the more Europeans type of thing? But for some reason, Asianness, you have to be, the code word is authentic. You have to have Vietnamese for Vietnamese, Cambodians for Cambodians, Hmong for Hmong, Chinese for Chinese. It becomes almost as if you're out, even though you could play it, but nah, you're not really authentic enough. But it's tiring. That's what it is. It's tiring because you have to feel like you're going to be an educator, an anthropologist, and sociologist at the same time in stating your case. Because then they'll go, oh, okay. Yeah, I understand that.
Well, I feel like
But
another
still,
perspective on it too is more so like, the authenticity of having a Hispanic person playing a Hispanic part, whether they are the right nationality or not, is like an issue or debate for another day. But I guess more so the fact that, I guess more the converse of kind of what we're talking about here. How, let's say, folks won't like seeing an Asian person play a character that has been typically white over time. 'Cause that's also a big thing we see a lot today. Is I'm trying to think of a good example here, but there was some uproar a little bit over even Cowboy Bebop on Netflix recently. How you have John Cho playing Spike, and a lot of folks were thinking, no, Spike should be white. So it's like, these kinds of things where people who aren't the color are getting the casting into these roles because it's kind of like, making sure they get seen, making sure they feel like they are part of this world.
right. Yeah. They canceled this show anyway. So
They did cancel it, unfortunately, yeah. Not John Cho's fault.
no. I mean, it was a very ambitious show, for crying out loud, But a lot of times it's one of those things. I don't know if there's ever going to be a real firm solution to. It's going to engage in conversation, but perhaps in the conversation leads to education and awareness. And a lot of times, I think sometimes the awareness is much better an outcome than to be not aware and maintain your little balloons or silos and not being able to move the silos. But the whole idea is, the great uniter is the fact that if you took a DNA test, most of the whites will have blood relations to blacks. It's just there. It's in the DNA. You can't wash it out,
Well, it's
You
nice to at
just,
least have these conversations, though. I mean, whether or not we agree on every single thing you and I have discussed right now, it's whatever, but it's good to be able to talk. So I do appreciate you being open to that discussion. And that
Oh, okay, yeah,
conversation.
yeah. There's so many fascinating stories. For example, like the Japanese had conquered Korea and made it part of the Japanese Empire for almost 50 years. They tried to eliminate the Korean language, Korean names, and everything like that. So in the 30s, a young Korean was drafted into the Imperial Army. They fought in a northern campaign in Manchuria against the Soviets. This one soldier was captured by the Soviets, treated as a Japanese I think, in central Russia. Germany invades Russia. The Nazis are marching through, burning through. The Soviets need soldiers. This soldier from the Imperial Army, who's really Korean, was drafted into the Russian army, is captured by the Nazis, winds up being conscripted, not killed, but conscripted into the labor battalion for the not German army on the Western Front, and is captured at Utah in the invasion in 1944, spends a month or a year, I think, as a POW in England, immigrates to the United States and settles in Evanston, Illinois. He's fought literally World War II in 3 different armies: the Imperial Japanese Army, the Russian Red Army, and the Nazi Wehrmacht. And he's captured by the Americans and is prisonered in England, and then winds up living in outside of Chicago. And they made a film, a Korean film about that, basically with some added drama kind of a thing, with the basic storyline about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like a screenplay in the works.
Yeah. I mean, it's based on some true stuff that can be told and educate some people. That's all.
Well, I think this is kind of a really bit of a long segue to get to this point, but it brings up one of the things that I think, in my opinion, is one of your most important works, and that was All American Girl.
Oh.
And this was a show growing up I was also a really huge fan of, and I've rewatched the series on YouTube because it's there. I've rewatched it. Not only does it hold up, I believe it's still just as relevant today as it was when it first aired, if not more so. And I mean, this is a show with like legitimate royalty here. I mean, it's got you, number one, of course. We got Margaret Cho. We have the amazing Amy Hill, who I really want to talk to at some point. Jodie Long, BD Wong is in this show. I mean, it's an amazing cast. I don't even know where to begin, but I just want to learn as much as I can about All American Girl because I feel like it's a show more people should be watching.
Oh, well, thank you for that. That's very nice of you to say. In fact, I was talking to somebody about that. It's the process of like All American Girl. At the time when they got Margaret, she was 1993 comedian, Rolling Stone comedy of 1993, or some big award, whatever, because of her risque act and the whole thing, the black latex bodysuits and stuff like that.
My favorite
But
comedy
then-
special.
Yeah. And I think they tried to make her into Anne Marie, Marlo Thomas, that girl in an Asian persona. In fact, when it was a hot show, everybody wanted to get on it, and I wound up getting cast in it. And then I think people say like BD didn't have an Asian accent, neither did Margaret. And Amy tells the story, says, "Didn't you have an accent before?" And I said, "Well, I worked on having a slight accent in the sense of, I'll go back to, like, say, for example, the story I tell in Kung Fu in Arrogant Dragon, where the director said, "You're sounding, can you add an accent? You're sounding too American." So I was going, "You ready to fight?" Because they want the L's and the R's, rata rock kind of a thing, and talking. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I'll just use the standard stage diction I learned at Northwestern. So instead of going, "Kwai Chang Kane, we the member of the Tong," it was "Kwai Chang Kane, we the member of the Tong." And and he said, "Cut, that's it." It sounded different. And into the ear, it's different. You don't have to give them the stereotype. You can throw something else to counter that stereotype and change the stereotype when you're doing it. So where everyone was, the older people in All American Girl who had the accent, I had just Margaret, it's just kind of a little stilted. And as soon as we got picked up, and I just said, "Fuck it, I'm just going to go and talk the way I did." And it worked, and everybody liked Benny the way he did and what he thought. And it was quite a fun show. I know what you mean, that it said a lot and can still hold up a lot. And
Really does,
interestingly
yeah.
enough, we had more flack from the Korean American community than anybody else. It was just, why could you just Korean American to do that? Well, the whole idea is, the whole idea acting is for crying out loud. You can have the Brit actors can play Germans, Russians, Italians, and the whole thing. Why is it that you have to, like we're talking about authentic? Why do you have to rigidly put it that way? I mean, it's like, for example, the greatest thing about Crazy Rich Asian, CRA, is that for the first time, the audiences in the world heard Asians speak in an American accent, a Brit accent, Australian accent, New Zealand accent, maybe Singaporean accent, Hong Kong English. So there's a bit of a different way of talking when they're talking like that, but most people are not listening to that. But by doing it that way, people's ears pick up and you listen, and becomes a norm. And it was one of those groundbreaking shows. You're doing it for, you're part of history when you're doing it. And unfortunately, it didn't get the numbers that it could have gotten. We were loved in Chicago and Philadelphia. We had a high ratings there. We had audiences there. San Francisco, not so much. But today, I think it's a kind of a show that would live on Netflix or wherever else. But now you got like Nora, I guess. I haven't seen Nora, but with Aquafina. And then some other shows like Kim's Convenience, that was 5 years on Canadian television, that
Fresh
kind
off
of
the
a
boat.
thing. So it's better to have done than to wind up being, I don't know, forever, I suppose. It's that kind of a thing.
It had a good run, and it's kind of a cult classic now. If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't. But that's why I talk about it on this show, because I think it's worth talking about. And it's not Star
yeah.
Trek. I don't care. It's still a great show. And honestly, throughout this entire interview, I feel like I'm talking to Benny Kim in a lot of ways. I feel like I'm talking to my Asian American dad right now. And because it feels like it really was an extension of who you were, and it feels very natural now getting to talk to you and talk to the real person behind all these roles. It feels like Benny Kim was just Clyde being a dad. And on that note, I kind of want to wonder, was there ever a moment on the show where it got real for you, where you kind of felt something maybe that stirred up some memories from your past, or just a moment that made it feel like, I'm not acting, this is an extension of me right now?
Well, I'll tell you this, like I said, I'm in my 27th year of recovery, and I got sober when we were doing the 4th episode of All American Girl. In fact, the the whole premise of being in recovery is you're powerless, and but that doesn't mean you can't let everything go. You have to do your job. You have to make the choices to, for example, your job at that point is to make everybody laugh, right? And the thing about it is when I did make the decision, I opened myself up to Amy Hill, played my mother. And I said, Amy, I am an alcoholic and I'm stopping drinking. And her reaction was, how wonderful. This is great. Congratulations. And it was like each time I would break my anonymity, other people would be so warm and enveloping and encouraging. In fact, Tim Lunabus was guest on that episode that I did that night, because you go in, your job is to make everybody laugh, and you find a dark part of the stage and you either sob or you just relieve or whatever. And we did 2 shows that, and after the show, we always went to a place called Dalt's near Warner Brothers, bar and restaurant, and to unwind. All other shows did too. And I walked into the main bar and I said, give me a Perrier. It was green bottle, it sparkled, and it was cold. And I had maybe 4 of them that night. And that's when I also said to Tim, I'm an alcoholic. He says, well, congratulations. You know, another point. The funny thing about it is we wound up working together on another iteration of Kung Fu when Warner's Entertainment or Entertaindom had an internet version of Kung Fu. Unfortunately, the characters were not articulate with their fingers, but I was playing Master Po and Tim played young Kane in it. And David played a part of Kane in it as well. So it was like we made it from film, TV to internet, you know. So that's a little digression there on that part. I think nobody realizes that. But so in that respect, there was also a point where Quentin Tarantino came in because he was friends with Margaret, and we did a takeoff on
Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction, and it was great. You know, you get to just let loose and redo the different scenes. So this was fun, and the audience gets to see Asian American actors being that kind of a character in that situation, you know. So it was all good. It's all very memorable and everything, you know. It's great today's world that there's interest in all the past shows, that it's not just ancient history type of thing, you know. So it's a wonderful opportunity to share those experiences, and knowing that there's people or an audience willing to listen or to hear, and are clued in, and they want to know more about their shows, so to speak, or whatever, you know.
Now, as far as other Star Trek connections go, Clyde, I know you also were directed in a show by Jonathan Frakes. I think that was Dollhouse, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
what do you remember about working with Frakes? Because you know, I've had a chance to speak with Frakes, and we talked mostly about his directing, in fact. So I'm curious to know, like, you know, how you felt his directing skills were, if you could describe the way he worked, and you know, if you had any time to actually chat with Jonathan.
Well, like it's very it's like moments you can chat, right? And the welcoming, and it's like 2 comrades who work together the same show or whatever. But like anything, the director is the main captain, so he's got his attention being pulled by various departments and directives as to what has to be done that day. But the fun thing about it is, I think Jonathan is having more fun as a director than he did as an actor. You know, because as an actor, he was basically the lead, good-looking guy in the uniform, and you know, saying what supporting executive officers have to say, blah 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 blah. Whereas a director, you get to be more creative in your input and how you want to shoot the show, and you have definite ideas how the show will look. And I think, for example, for them to pick Jonathan to do Discovery was a brilliant choice, because he understands the whole, not only the concept, but the world, and that world of Trekdom, so to speak.
Yes.
and um, and so that's good. And so he is more of a fun guy in directing as well. He tries to keep the set very light and everybody comfortable, and so that it becomes a conducive space to work. Sometimes you find yourself having experiences working with dictators in many respects, who will yell and scream at everyone to get it right, and to the point where you can't say anything about it because he's the director. And even the exec producers aren't saying anything about it, so they must somehow approve of the behavior, and you don't want to go against that. So there's always that fine line. Of course, there are those that have maybe more weight behind them and cred to be able to say, fuck you, and walk off. Go stuff yourself or whatever. And they do that. And the director's left going, "Ah, bah, 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 bah," or the director won't act like that in the first place, but pick on somebody else. But fortunately, I have, in my experience, I've worked with some martinets and dictators like that early in my career. And some of them are also in the middle career type, who are well-known directors, but have highly volatile personalities, but I would get along with them. So I was never the object of the screaming or anything like that. In fact, John Frankenheimer was known to have high energy personality and such. And we were doing the challenge, and we were doing a setup. For example, my character lives here, so Scott Glenn has to walk past me, turn the corner, and there are the swords there. And as we're setting up, he just turned to me and says, "What do you think about that?" And it was a night shoot, and I was thinking, I said, "John, what if Scott walks past my room? I don't come out like the script says. So he feels confident so that by the time he's there and hits the room where the swords are, he's feeling confident. But then I pop out going, 'What are you doing here?' And he went, 'Brilliant, brilliant.' What am I thinking about? Reset." And I went, "Oh my God." He said, "Wow, that's kind of a nice moment. I'll just take it." And there was another point where I said, "Well, John," I said, "Clyde." There you go. Okay. But you just, you never know. I mean, it's sort of like playing, right? I mean, sometimes there is a safe zone when there's fire burning, and you can walk through without getting burned,
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress from Jonathan as a director, but well, proof is in the pudding. He keeps working a lot as a director. So there's that.
And I know that you had a chance to work with one Sulu out there. I know you've worked with John Cho, but I'm curious to know if you ever had a chance to work with or meet even George Takei.
Oh, no, I know George through personal functions at the Academy, where he's a member, I'm a member of everything. And his husband or wife, Brad. And I do remember saying, "Isn't it ironic that George comes out of the closet and his career, boom, goes to another level?" And it becomes and a catchphrase that he had from a show called "Oh My," winds up being this meme that he's got a totally different persona about. And how funny life that is. I mean, for the longest time, he couldn't break the barrier of having done Sulu on Star Trek. And it was through the resurgence of the movies. After the first one was kind of blah. Yeah, really blah. It was like with Steve Collins, it was like blah. But when they got it back again with the subsequent films. What show did I work with John Cho then? You may be familiar.
You worked on him in one of the Harold and Kumar films. He played his dad.
In what show again?
It was one of the Harold and Kumar films, I believe.
Oh, no, you're right. Yeah. Harold and Kumar escaped to Guantanamo. Yes.
That's the one, yep.
That's another interesting one, is that when Harold and Kumar, Go to White Castle came out, it kind of was bland in the theater exhibition. But when they put it on DVDs and cable, I believe. No, maybe DVDs. It just went through the rocket like a moon. It was huge. And I remember putting that in a note. And then they were doing this Harold Kumar Escape from Guantanamo. And my agent said, well, they want to see you for this role. It just has one line. I mean, I don't know if you want to go. And in my head, I'm going, of course I want to go. If it's going to be playing Harold's father, you never know. So it was so that Harold's mom had a line, there was his father had a line, and there were two other lines in the casting directors. Oh, just read all the lines, okay? And so fine. And so I wound up getting cast playing the father. We were in Shreveport, Louisiana to shoot. And the two creators were co-directing. And we were beginning the scene. They just says, how about let's just see what happens, everybody fly. Let's improv the whole scene. You know the basis. So what you see is basically what we improved.
Wow.
And we made it better, and made it funnier in the whole thing.
That's amazing.
And I did see John that night because he came by to visit and everything like that. That's right. But you see where it is. Sometimes you have to ask. I don't have time to go down to Google and to find out, but it's, yeah, you're right. Yes. And thank you very much for being my guide and giving me my prompts as to who, what, and work I went with. Yeah.
I do my homework on these shows.
Oh, you do. Absolutely. That's great.
Thank
you.
you.
I know you're going to cut that thing. So you just keep a little project on that.
Yeah.
But no, yeah. But that's some of the reasons why, so that you become, it's like doing, like working with Darren Barnett on Never Have I Ever on Netflix. It was one of those things where my agent said, there's this role of the grandfather to the Paxton, the lead. And I don't know if you've said, of course, I'm familiar with it. It's like a YA show that is like through the roof in popularity. And so by doing, at one point I posted a photo of Darren and myself, and in publicity and PR and marketing, take it all off, take it off, take any reference of this show off. You're divulging everything. Oh, okay. You're safe to do it after it starts streaming in July. And then when it started streaming in July, it was like, wow. And what it did, what you realize is that if you keep abreast of what's going on, you can become part of the conversation again. It's almost like people rediscover you in a way. Oh, isn't he the dude that did this? Oh, yeah, I remember growing up and watching him in that. How old are you, by the way? That kind of thing.
It's Principal Shimada right there.
Yeah, that's Principal Shimada. It's almost like a guide to time, sort of like, yeah, All in the Family. I remember that guy. Yeah, that and Ellery Queen and that and
Mannix.
This and that. And then it's the 80s. And then it's like, oh, Cagney and Lacey. Oh, yeah. Oh, Hawaii Five-0. Oh, Magnum PI. Oh, the new Magnum PI. Oh, the new Hawaii Five-0. So I got to do 5-0, having done the original and getting to do in the first season, going back.
Yeah, I think you're one of the few actors who actually got to be on both the original and the reboot.
Oh, was I? Have I? Really? Yeah.
I don't think there's been too many others who have done both shows.
Ah, that's great. Sometimes you do it for that reason. And the funny thing about it is, in the current Magnum PI, the character that Tim Kang plays, Gordon Katsumoto, is the character that was created for me in the first Magnum PI that spoke like John Wayne. But so I was kind of honored that they kept for this show, for Magnum PI, the new one, they keep the integrity of a lot of the characters that they had before. And they honor it by bringing them back to the show. So I was glad to see that Tim was doing Gordon. Only he doesn't speak like John Wayne. He's more of the cop. He plays the sensibility like more of he's very good, by the way, as well. And I'm very happy for Amy to play Kumu, who's on the show. She's very good at that too.
All right, so Clyde, real fast as we come to the end of this episode here today, best day ever on a set and the worst day ever on a set.
Best day on the set, Paradise Road, working with Glenn Close, singing that song from My Village to her. Best day. Worst day on the set was in a episode of Get Christy Love, where I was supposed to play the police sketch artist. and having the director castigate me in front of everybody because I couldn't sketch. He wanted somebody who could sketch, and it had to be a left-handed person. And I went, I'm right-handed. And Mel Stewart was his name. And Mel was this son of a bitch. That's all I can say. He just, when you're an object of derision and the whole thing, you're just embarrassed. I think you brought out the worst day that I remember now. Thank you.
I'm glad I'm doing my job. What is the piece of work that you're most proud of doing?
Actually, I'll still go back. Oh, it's a toss-up between Paradise Road and Shanghai Surprise. Shanghai Surprise in the comedy section of it all, as in a comic turn, being able to be very versatile and create the humor within the character. Paradise Road in allowing me freedom to develop as a dramatic actor in many of the scenes that weren't specifically written, but where your character and you, the actor, create that character. You fill in the space, the unspoken space with your being. That's what Paradise Road allowed me to do in many scenes, just listening to the women sing, or reacting to Kate Blanchett or Glenn Close and Pauline Collins, having a ability and opportunity to develop the scene. I mean, at one point, there's a scene where my character has to take a rifle and shoot at the dog. And I said to Bruce, you want me to shoot at the dog too? But those kind of things to create a full, rich character that shows there's a reason why he can be brutal. There's also a reason why the women in real life at the war crimes trial spoke in his defense, and how that didn't matter. He was still executed. Whereas that he was following the orders of the Kempeitai captain and colonel who got away with it and wound up in Parliament and later on in life. That human quality. Yeah, I'd say that one.
What is the best piece of advice that you were given by somebody that you still remember and still use to this day?
Hit your mark, be on time, know your lines. That's basically it. Do your homework also. Yeah.
Always handy.
Yeah.
All right, and last thing for today, Clyde, I know we've talked about so many things here, but I got to bring it back to Star Trek, of course, because that's what this show is all about.
All right.
What's the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
Oh, well, it's just being that feeling of belonging to a world that's become worldwide, internationally popular. It's that you become one of the players or one of the icons. I mean, even the fact that I signed a second set of 500 baseball cards or Star Trek cards with the new photos of me as the Admiral, with 50 cards saying this, 50%, saying this, but so they would change it up. And not having to have a Kodak Instamatic camera to validate that I did it, but I can just take selfies of myself doing it. No, but that's cool. That's cool. Like my kid, he's like in his 40s now, and he said, look what I got. And he got one of those original cards that I signed years ago that he bought online and everything. That's what's cool. What's cool is I remember there's an actor was in The Wire, and he's one of his latest films was in It, and he's a good friend of my sons. And when they were younger, in the 15, 20 years ago, he would say, I want to be an actor like your dad. And my kid would go, huh? What do you mean? The dude works all the time, man. I want to be like that. And I went, oh, that's nice, because for a long time, my son just didn't understand, why couldn't you do this? Why couldn't you? Now it's sort of like, wow, you did all this? Wow. So that's a kind of a good thing. And so being part of the Star Trek universe is great. Being part of the MASH universe is great. Being part of that whole thing, being part of All in the Family kind of universe is great. The Magnum, universe, all those things. It's kind of, when I think back on it, it's sort of like, it's bloody cool to be associated with iconic shows like that, you know.
Well, Clyde, I just want to say thank you so much for being willing to spend this much time with me today. I mentioned at the top of the show, I don't remember if we recorded it or not, but I remember saying how, you were pretty much on that list I had when I very first started this podcast. I had a list of people I wanted to talk to. You were on the top 10 of that list. I had to get you on. It finally happened. And, I don't throw this term around, but you are a living legend. Absolutely. I've grown up watching you. You've been around for really forever, and you're still working today, which is amazing. So, really, I'm trying to find words right now, but I'm just full of gratitude for you for being willing to spend this much time with me. I never thought I'd have this opportunity. So really, this means a lot to me. It means a lot to my audience. And I want to just thank you for your beautiful work over the many decades that you've been working and that you continue to work. So I also want to wish you much success as your career continues, and as well as another 100 years of sobriety for you. So, Clyde, thank you so much.
Boy. Back at you. Thank you, man. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold. Until next time, please don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you're in a position to financially support the show, please consider becoming a supporter over on patreon.com/trekuntold, or pick up some merchandise from our Redbubble store. If you're looking for direct links for any of these things, links will be right in the show notes. Special thanks to Scott Ray for providing us with this week's guest. If you'd like to book them for an autograph signing or convention appearance, email Scott at scottray67@aol.com. If you have any questions or comments for the show, or would like to suggest a guest, or discuss any sponsorship ideas with us, send me a message at trekuntold@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to Trek Untold and for continuing to support this show. I hope you'll come back next time to learn more stories about Star Trek and beyond. Until then, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz, and always remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the RageWorks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.